2010 was a big year for smartphones. The Motorola Droid was taking the world by storm, and Apple launched the iPhone 4, which would become one of their most successful devices ever. At Microsoft, though, things weren't looking too great for their mobile division. A couple years prior, they had acquired Danger, the company behind the infamous Sidekick, which had already been through enough scandals to weaken its reputation. Under Microsoft, however, the Sidekick service, which stored user data in the cloud, experienced a total outage for almost a week, meaning users lost access to uploaded data such as contacts and photos. Microsoft was subsequently faced with lawsuits from upset Sidekick users, some of which lasted past the lifetime of the Microsoft Kin, which is the device I'm talking about today. By that time, the Sidekick's reputation was in the toilet, and other companies like Apple and Samsung had already risen to the task of giving Sidekick users better options. Microsoft had two choices: give up or reboot. And for better or worse, they chose the latter, which is what brought us the Kin in mid-2010. There are actually two Kin phones, the Kin 1 and the Kin 2, but this video is going to focus on the Kin 2 for reasons I'll talk about later. These new Kin phones were targeted at users between the ages of 15 and 30, the same demographic the Sidekick had also targeted. Unfortunately, trying to recreate past success is often easier said than done. Microsoft mistakenly thought being able to take photos up your shirt and sending them to your friends was the only thing a teenager needed in a smartphone. Seriously, these are their real ads. So instead of an app store or even side-loadable apps, this phone comes with just the basic essentials like a calculator and calendar. And the Kin Spot. This was basically just a little green dot at the bottom of the screen where you could drag photos, videos, websites, pretty much anything you wanted to easily share with friends over text message or email. But wait, can't you basically do the same thing with any other smartphone? Yes you can. And I could honestly end the video right there and tell you that's why the Kin failed in less than 50 days, but there's so much more here than just a lack of unique features. If you're not yet convinced this thing deserved its failure, watch to the end and I guarantee you'll see what I mean. The Kin 2's design from almost every angle is very normal and unoffensive, with slightly rounded edges reminiscent of the Palm Pre. Up front, we've got a 3.4-inch TFT display and one single button right below the display, similar to the iPhones of the time. Around back, we've got an 8-megapixel camera sitting next to a tiny LED flash and the Kin logo, which is presumably purposefully off-center. Below that, we've got some bright green text that tells us this phone was manufactured by Sharp, carried by Verizon, and runs Windows Phone? I honestly don't know what Windows Phone even means in this context, since the Windows Phone OS hadn't even come out yet, and the Kin runs a Kin Phone exclusive operating system, unsurprisingly called KinOS. We'll talk software in a minute, but moving on with the hardware tour, along the side there's a camera shutter button, some unimpressive volume buttons, and the power lock button on the upper right corner. Now where have we seen that before? Anyway, sliding up the display reveals a full QWERTY keyboard, something we were already beginning to see get phased out as softer keyboards were becoming more mature. This keyboard uses small but respectably clicky circle keys with letters printed in lowercase, a rebellious move against the traditional uppercase seen on most keyboards. The letter keys aren't terrible, actually, it's mostly just this super thin, stiff spacebar that throws me off. The bottom row of keys are so thin, in fact, that the phone and search logos are partially cut off. This isn't just from wear, they literally couldn't fit the logos on there, the buttons are that thin. The keyboard really isn't terrible though, I could live with this even if it is a little weird. The software, on the other hand, took this phone from weird to painful. As I mentioned earlier, this phone runs KinOS, an operating system designed specifically for the Microsoft Kin devices. When you first boot up the Kin, all of the startup screens, including the Verizon logo and the Kin screen, are in horizontal mode, making you think that's how the software was designed to run. That is not the best way to use the Kin though. My best guess is they did it this way to make Sidekick users feel more at home, but it just makes using this already poorly designed OS 10 times more difficult. Flipping it into the proper orientation, we can start exploring the OS that, in my opinion, should have never existed. For context, Microsoft already had a really good smartphone operating system called Windows Mobile. Maybe it was due for a little update, which it would soon get in the form of Windows Phone, but it was still a fully functional smartphone operating system. KinOS, on the other hand, while it was technically built on Windows CE, retained no resemblance of any operating system on any smartphone. It is mostly touchscreen friendly with bigger, easier to tap buttons than Windows Mobile, but that's about all the good I can say about it. The KinOS has a pretty minimal design, but it's far from intuitive. Display brightness, for example, is in the Settings app under Screen Lock, which is a super weird decision. Throughout the UI, there's a random mix of buttons that aren't labeled, and buttons that have weirdly unnecessary labels. Also, there's a whole section for language, but your only options are English and Spanish. This whole system just feels so rushed and incomplete, like they spent all their budget coming up with oddly sensual names for their boring but serviceable ringtones. I guess I'll give them points for the fun vibe of their ringtones, but the Microsoft vibe just isn't there. To look at the software, it doesn't look like anything you'd expect at a Microsoft product. Compared to Windows Phone 7, which was just around the corner from the launch of the Kin, this Kin OS feels decades behind. Going ahead and exploring the software a little bit, let's start on the main screen. You get 12 tiles, one per app. Most of the stuff is pretty boring, so let me just highlight the more interesting ones. Music and More is probably my favorite here. It's basically the Zune software you'd get on Microsoft's Zune media players, which were, at the time, not officially discontinued, but were on the way out. You can listen to FM radio, watch videos, and listen to music synced from the Zune software on your computer or purchased from Zune Pass. Putting Zune software on the Kin actually made sense, because if the Kin were to succeed, it would bring the failing Zune services up with it. I could talk more about the Kin-Zune relationship, but that's another topic entirely. I will say this was a super smart ecosystem tie-in. It just didn't work out since, the Kin sucked worse than its 8-megapixel camera, which isn't saying much since this isn't a great camera. If used where there is sufficient lighting, photos from the Kin camera are usually well exposed and sharp enough for subjects to be easily recognized. There's no autofocus though, and photos quickly become noisy with any loss of light. This was 2010 though. I think it's safe to say this subpar camera was the least of the Kin's worries. Odd UI design choices and poor performance plagued this phone more than anything else. Every animation stuttered, and scrolling through lists and menus was extremely painful. The Kin wasn't lacking in hardware power though. With a Tegra APX 2600 CPU and 256 megabytes of RAM, at this time this phone looked pretty good, at least on paper. But even back then, the performance just wasn't up to the task, apparently all because of poorly designed software. Combining the painful performance with lack of features makes a confusing combination that begs the question, what was the point of this thing? From one perspective, a minimalist social media phone with no installable apps or extra unnecessary features sounds like a good idea, especially in 2010. When it comes to the real world though, this phone feels under-equipped and rushed, not to mention overpriced. The Kin 2 launched at the price of $100 US, which was already kinda pricey for what it was. The nail in the coffin though was that this phone required you to commit to a 2-year contract from Verizon, which meant paying a minimum of $70 per month for 2 years. One of the reasons the plans were so expensive was because Verizon classified the Kin as a smartphone, meaning you were required to pay for pricey data plans, which the Kin didn't really even put to good use with its minimal feature list. So while it may have been cheaper than some of the smartphones out there, it still came with a cost that was maybe a little too much. The Kin even had built-in Wi-Fi connectivity, which made the data plans even more unnecessary. Finally, what about the other Kin phone, the Kin 1? I don't have one to test out, but honestly, I feel like the Kin 2 was really the star of the show. Not that it's a better phone, the Kin 1 was just its own thing that didn't even try to compete with other smartphones. Honestly, had we been talking about the Kin 1, I probably would have given it more slack because of the lower price and unique design. The Kin 2 though, this is the first time on this channel where I'm gonna say this phone has nothing going for it. Not now, not back in 2010. Even the unique features like the Kin Spot didn't let you do anything any other smartphone couldn't already do. That's really the main reason it was killed only 6 weeks after launch. This thing just didn't land anywhere. After the death of the Kin, Verizon still had tons of unsold Kins that they didn't know what to do with. Since this was all Microsoft's fault to start with, Verizon just shipped all the unsold stock back to them and moved on. Now Microsoft had to deal with these unwanted Kins, so in a reworked partnership with Verizon, they started giving them out basically free or heavily discounted. Then in January 2011, Microsoft shut down the online services that Kin relied on for cloud storage of users' contents, and Verizon began offering trade-ins of either Kin phone for a free 3G smartphone. And with that, the Kin was officially dead. Now I want to say this was not the video I wanted to make about the Kin phone. There's so much more to the story that was left out of this video, I just wasn't quite able to fit it all in. But I'd really like to make another video more in depth with the history and demise of the Kin phones. If you'd be interested in seeing that, please let me know in the comments below and I'll definitely try to make that happen. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos about anything tech, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.